Hello and welcome back to What the Flick. I'm Matt, and joining me, Kim Horcher, John Iadarola, some of the people on this network that are still watching Westworld because we've had a few people drop out. I believe this is your first time joining us for these.
No, I was there last week.
he was here.
Oh, I was gone.
Did Alonzo drop out?
Alonzo has dropped out, yes.
Really? Brett
He's done with the show, he
angrily
says.
describes the show in the hallway.
Mm-hmm.
He watches it, but he hate watches it.
Yeah.
I think that's the wrong attitude. We are here
agree.
today to talk about the 5th episode of the 2nd season of Westworld, and it is titled Akane no Mai. Is that correct?
It means Akane's dance, basically.
Akane's dance. Oh, all right.
Apparently it has multiple meanings.
What else does it mean?
They said that one translation is also red as in blood, one is in Mai as in like my freedom or something like that.
Akane means I think it means deep red or dark red.
The explanation I read was that the first and second terms both had two meanings, so you could combine it into 4 potential interpretations. But I don't speak the language,
What a
so I don't
beautiful
know.
language. And that was a funny way for them to describe why Maeve's commands didn't work on Ghost Nation. Because she wasn't speaking in Lakota.
Right. So that's one of the things we see early on, right? Is
That's a
that
good point.
they're getting attacked. The cliffhanger from last week, we saw this samurai or Ronin rushing at them, and then she speaks, and it doesn't actually do the thing she wants it to because she's speaking in English. And the writer says, "Oh well, you were speaking in the wrong language." Right. So that's what was interesting because then that stops being an issue for her. But it's interesting to get this much in detail in another section of the park, right? We've spent most of our time in Westworld, and we get told early on in this episode that the Samurai World is for people who found the original park too tame.
But it's similar. I really liked the Japanese Sweetwater opening scene with the painted black played with the samisen.
Yes. Yeah, that was really fun, and it's the same plot line that we saw with Maeve and Hector
robbing the safe.
Right. And then they start to recognize, oh wait, we're all the same characters, and they accuse him of
They all
plagiarism.
had different attitudes toward their double. Hector didn't trust Musashi.
Right.
Maeve had a lot of empathy for Akane, and Armistice and Aramistisu. I don't know who she is.
Yeah, I don't know.
They were into each other.
Yeah, they were just very curious. It was like a parrot in a mirror, I guess.
Well, and there's a line where Maeve says, "How much can we trust? How much can I trust Akane?" And the response is well, how much can you trust yourself? Yeah, I liked this episode a lot, partly because it got into the details of what it would be like having kind of the production mechanics behind the different aspects of the park, right? Of course the guy would be running the same plot lines in different places just by necessity.
It's a lot of work. I mean, I think anyone who writes or maybe even codes would understand, I have a deadline, I've got to dig for this one in my resources.
I was kind of curious if the idea is, and it might not even be 100% accurate, that this is for people who thought that Westworld was too tame. First of all, those are some sick people. But second of all, then why isn't the Man in Black there? If he wants something more visceral, why is he still sticking around in Westworld?
I think he's obsessed with Westworld, personally.
Maybe he's just not into the samurai thing.
It's interesting because we don't get I think we get none of William in this particular episode, right? But I think I was having a discussion with somebody before the show about what is Delos doing here and how much are they complicit in this? And I thought, well, old William definitely is. Right, because at this point, old William is still in the park, and he's playing the game through, and part of that is that he enjoys and needs it to be real, and needs it to be super, super dangerous and lethal, right? And he's one of the top guys in the companies, so I could see he's probably played out and and done the gamer grinding all the way through Samurai World, but now he's leveled up. Now he's got these secret. What is it? Legend of Zelda, alternate adventure that's under the regular
returning
game.
to your
It's new
favorite
game
game,
plus.
maybe.
Right, but with upgraded content and downloadable content,
which helps to explain how this guy, who's apparently been in the park for something like 40, 50 years. I mean, we've now been to every location 3 times. The park is big, but it's not that big to spend decades in. He must have ventured out to other parks. Because otherwise, what do you just go into the 4 and Sweetwater and the Tiny Resistance Village over and over and over for decades?
Right.
Yeah.
And so there's other things, right? We've seen the one set in the Raj. We've seen Samurai World. God only knows what else is out there and what the show has the budget to show us.
I'm glad that you mentioned the Raj, I guess, because the female character who's now been identified as his daughter, they said, somebody pointed out in one of the reviews that she had been able to communicate with the Ghost Nation people and says, I just picked up the language. But did she just pick up the language? Because the writer was saying to Maeve, all of you inherently have the ability to communicate with anyone. You can learn all these languages.
Are you saying she's a host?
I don't know.
Well,
maybe.
So
maybe she is.
I would
Probably.
say maybe with those Lakota, they're programmed at that point to not respond unless you speak to them in their language, right?
But would she have just picked up the language? Is that plausible, or does it make it more sense that was a clue that they'd embedded an episode earlier? That would only make sense in hindsight, that she could have some sort of natural host ability to speak the language.
That's a good question.
Well, we'll find out, I guess.
And,
but
That's a theory.
And I think part of it comes into what this show talks about, this particular episode, it's, look, you have to play out some of this narrative just because of the way we've written it and the characters. These particular hosts haven't completely eclipsed their programming, and they're still used to that kind of cultural tradition that's written into them, which is you have to hear them out, because if not, it's going to just come to swords immediately anyway. So like there's a little bit of like, well, you got to do a little bit of this dance, so to speak, to get to them. I thought it was interesting when we found out about the Shogun and why he's not functioning along his storyline. And it's like, oh, no, it's not that he's eclipsed his programming, he's broken.
Yeah. And you wonder how many that might be.
Yeah. And then I thought, well, if they talk to Bernard knows how to fix that.
Yeah.
Right, with
he could fix that. I don't know if he could fix neck sawn off.
No.
I don't know if he could necessarily fix that.
That
part.
was a great scene.
That was
You know
brutal.
she was going to do something.
Yeah. I didn't think she'd be able to do
that was.
Yeah, great cliffhangers in the past couple of episodes too.
Yes. Yeah. No, I like this one a lot. There's a lot that we'll still need to unpack on this one, but and the music cue during the dance was
Cream
Wu-Tang
from
Clan.
Wu-Tang
Clan,
which you commented on. That's based on Chinese culture. I mean, one of them was wearing a Chinese shirt.
Okay, sure. And Felix is from Hong Kong.
Felix is from Hong Kong. He can't speak to them.
Right. Sylvester, right.
I read that the actor who's playing the Ronin is also their cultural expert who is correcting things.
Well, and so his character is called Musashi, and so he said that he made a big point of doing the double sword that's a throwback to the style that the legendary Musashi had used.
I mean, the reflections between Westerns and old samurai movies are pretty clear, so I think it worked so well. I loved that opening scene with Japanese Sweetwater and all of the people, the reflected characteristics between the two worlds.
And also to be able to see the copy of their own storyline is it's interesting, but it's also it thematically makes a lot of sense that they're developing, they're becoming more independent and everything. To be able to see as an outsider exactly what they had previously gone through was a pretty unique experience. It's one thing to know that you've been programmed and that you're acting out these things, but to witness the exact same storyline or almost the exact same storyline is something.
Well, and so a couple of developments before we get back to, we haven't really talked about what's going on with Dolores and Teddy yet, but the thing that I found really fascinating in this show is, Maeve is talking about she's found a new voice, right? And she's using that both kind of, she's using it very literally, but she's also, there's deeper meanings to that, right? Because at some point, she doesn't need to speak to the other host to reprogram them, which is, and so early on in the episode, the Shogun world inhabitants hosts see that she's a witch, but then it doesn't matter because she can just think at them.
She's a psychic witch.
Yeah, right? Which,
She's leveled up for sure.
She's definitely leveled up.
It's like in Harry Potter, eventually you don't need to have the wand or say the words.
Well, so that's one of the things, when she got Felix to adjust her programming, is that something that all of the adjustments in her programming made, does she have basically a Wi-Fi interface that she doesn't need to give voice commands? She can just program them.
Well, they all have some sort of Wi-Fi.
As an AI.
Right.
Because we've always had that trope and fear in sci-fi of what if they evolve and get better and we can't handle them.
Well, and you raise a good point, right? Because they do all have some sense
you
of
can
a
connect
Wi-Fi.
to them with the thing, but you can also track them from the central location.
Because one will locate where the other ones are, right? So they, at any given time, the hosts know where the other hosts are, or at least identify other hosts.
Well, I also, in this episode, I liked the demonstration of the dichotomy between Maeve and Dolores, that both want to be independent and hate what was done to them by humans who are controlling them. Now, both of them are controlling other hosts. Maeve is doing it sort of through natural evolution, unless she was programmed to do this, while Dolores literally has a human coming around and reprogramming people she knows.
Okay, now that we're talking about Dolores, I'm starting to think Maeve is the only host that's self-aware. Because Dolores is straight up a villain now.
No, I think Dolores is definitely self-aware.
I don't think she is, because she's doing, okay, so what their thing is the hosts, the question is whether or not they can make their own decisions. She took away Teddy's ability to make his own decisions. She did exactly what her captors or her aggressors did to her. Why would she do that?
I mean, if you have free will, you have the free will to be evil, I guess.
Yeah, I guess my take on it is, see, I'm on the opposite.
She's a real hit it and quit it kind of girl.
I'm a little worried that Maeve is just still responding to her programming that's resurfaced, where I think Dolores, as what we keep getting hints at, is one of the oldest hosts in the park. And based on all of her experiences and the memories that are coming back, she started to develop her own ideas and her own sense of self. And where that becomes a conflict with Teddy is that Teddy's decision to go forward is he doesn't want to fight anymore. And they have that moment where she says, I was worried about my past affection for you being programming, but no, it's all real. And you got that great love scene, which I thought was somewhat surprisingly tastefully shot.
We got a butt shot.
Right, but there's not a lot of nudity like we've seen everywhere else in Westworld.
There was a penis, but not in that scene.
Right, not in that scene. And so you kind of,
What?
she takes Teddy out to the tree and the meadow, and they're talking about how her father dealt with the cattle, and I thought, when she took him out there, I thought, oh, he's not coming back from this meadow.
No, as
behind the
soon as she
old
said, we burned him. That's
Right.
when Teddy,
But
you're done. You're screwed.
But she gives him the chance, and then he says, oh, he wants something different, and then, oh, well, okay, that doesn't work for me, I'm going to rewrite
Let
you.
him go
She's
then.
terrible. I can't root for her anymore after what she did to Teddy.
I think obviously the question of whether Maeve or Dolores are actually free of their programming is an interesting one. But if the central question is, do they have free will? Like, are they being controlled by humans, or can they be like humans? It's sort of a false question, because that has the unstated assumption that humans have free will, that we are not simply programmed by our experiences. I think that Maeve could be free of direct control telling her to do one thing or another, still be operating off of sort of the base level programming like we do. I think that she might have our level of free will, which is not very free.
So one of the things I keep thinking about this is that we see with Maeve wants to get back to her daughter, and I don't get the sense that there's much of a plan past that. Teddy says in this episode, in some of his final words, as we know him as Teddy, is he just wants to find a place and live out his lives in peace, whereas Dolores, and maybe she's the one who sees the long game in this, she knows that they're not going to be, or maybe she suspects they'll never be left alone. She's going to take all of humanity out before they take her out. Like, maybe she's learned too well.
I think that scene with Bernard in the beginning where they said about 1/3 of our IP is gone, I think that occurs in the future. Dolores is wiping out the IP.
Oh, okay. So that's what I was wondering about, because early on, right, we see Strand and some of the other Delos guys talking about, and the one tech is saying, yeah, about 1/3 of them are wiped clean.
Well, we know that there were all those bodies in the water. That could represent 1/3 of the
And there's all
hosts.
those bodies in the room, and I thought one of them looked a lot like
One of them looked like Teddy.
Oh,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I
But
didn't-
supposedly one of the bodies in the water at the beginning of the season looked like Teddy at the end of the first
Maybe that
episode.
well, so they
occurred-
dragged them all out. They dumped
Yeah.
them in the mesa.
Oh, okay. Yes. Oh, God. But that doesn't
know.
necessarily mean
I'm
that there's
so
not
mad
another
at
Teddy
her.
body.
Like, I still think she's under control by Ford. That's my theory.
Okay.
Well, they also said that there's a bunch of empty bodies that don't have any programming. It could well be that her strategy is get all of the brains of my followers, put them into fresh bodies, dump the old bodies so that we think that they're all gone, but they've actually transitioned out into the real world in new shells.
Oh, see, I didn't think that meant that the brain control units. I thought that just meant they were wiped. And see, I assumed that meant
I
they were
don't
just
know.
wandering around with no programming.
Well,
But
I mean, what
maybe
did
that
she
doesn't
do
make
to
sense.
Teddy? Because if you look in the future, like
find
next
out.
week, it looked like he was kind of a drone at this point.
She overrode his program as something, but
At
in the
first, I
same way as
thought
the
she
zombies,
was
maybe?
combining him with another personality, like how she's Dolores and Wyatt. But
don't
then
know.
it really seemed like she made him into like an empty vessel, sort of. Oh, speaking
He was
of which,
a pretty empty
didn't-
vessel anyway.
No, he's not stupid.
He's pretty dumb.
He's good and kind, and those are
He's
good
too
qualities.
kind. But there's been those hints of him doing something really awful that we got in the last season. That there's some terrible dark past of his that I think they've kind of abandoned.
I
Like
wanted to
they've abandoned many
mention
things.
Clementine's scene.
Oh yeah.
That was
Yeah.
so. She did such a good job with
Yeah.
that, expressing her sadness and longing with
Yeah.
no words.
That was, yeah.
having a similar experience that the others had in Shogun World,
right,
actually.
Right. All right.
But really just destroyed.
Well, we'll find out what goes on in the next week because there'll be another episode next week and we'll come back and we'll talk about it and we'll see what happens. But that's all we have time to talk about today. Thank you for joining us for What the Flick. We'll be back. I'll be back with with Christy this week. We'll talk about some of the other news and TV shows and movie events that are happening this week. You guys will join us next week, hopefully again for Westworld.
I'm here.
And I know you're going to see Solo tonight.
Yes, I'm wearing this
exciting.
necklace.
Right? So there will be reviews on What the
God.
Flick for Solo this week too.
And
so,
maybe Nerd Alert.
And maybe Nerd Alert. So thank you for joining us. Oh, and maybe I'll be on Nerd Alert. Maybe so. We'll see. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.